All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started now. So it's a pleasure to speak with you all today, and thank you for joining. My name is David Weeks, and I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer of Sunrise International. I'm joined by my co-founder and president of Sunrise, Gavin Newton-Tanzer. So it's a pleasure to be speaking with you all today. I'll be taking the lead on presenting some key updates from China's digital space that we saw in late 2019 and in 2020. Throughout the course of the webinar, do feel free to use the Q&A tool. Gavin will be monitoring the chat as well as the Q&A. And later on in the presentation, we'll let you know when. We'll also be using the chat to share an important link where we'll actually be able to demonstrate how you can actually do information sessions inside of a virtual reality campus tour, which is a pretty cool function. So anyways, to begin and just to give you a sense of what we'll be doing today, we'll aim to wrap up within the hour, and we'll plan to leave about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A, where we'll be able to answer your questions live and in turn. First, we'll offer a little bit of context on digital marketing amid the pandemic. Obviously, the context of COVID-19 is really important here. Second, we'll offer some key updates on the big three social media platforms. We'll talk about some of those pesky updates from the Trump administration, which you might have read about, some policy updates regarding social media marketing in China. We'll talk about websites and the Great Firewall, updates to search engine marketing and optimization. We'll talk about those Zoom webinars. All of our lives seem to be led within Zoom, so we'll talk about those info sessions that everyone seems to be hosting and some new perspectives and approaches and tools to do those information sessions. And finally, we'll try to offer and condense some next steps for everyone for consideration. So obviously, if you're in this webinar, you probably read our digital white paper, or at the very least downloaded it for 2020. For context, in case you're unaware, Sunrise is a company that helps higher education institutions to market in China by hosting recruitment tours and helping them to localize their web and social media presence. About the context here. So we ordinarily, every year since 2016, we've offered presentations and tried to provide a little bit more information about how to market in China using digital platforms. The context of COVID-19 is unique though. So between COVID-19 and various policy moves by the Trump administration, it's been a really hard year for international recruiters and professionals in international admissions, ranging from the most selective universities to those that very actively recruit in China. I think that there's a continued need, however, to recruit international students under the assumption that eventually travel restrictions on the pandemic will lift and thus student mobility will become more possible. Right now, visas and travel are very complicated and many students are participating in classes remotely in order to continue advancing their studies and avoiding the need to take time off. However, eventually, normal recruitment will recommence. The question is, will you have the inquiries, the leads, the early pipeline of students that are going to position you well to succeed when eventually we can kind of return to the status quo ante. Also, I think that it's important to be realistic. International recruitment is doubtlessly going to see a dip. For many of you, you've probably already seen this, starting as early as January of this year. However, let's not forget that the United States, many of the people who are joining this webinar are from US institutions, enjoys really strong fundamentals in higher education. There is a perception among Chinese families and among Chinese employers that American institutions are, offer some of the best caliber education in the world. We also have capacity like no other country. Even if every single Chinese student in the country wanted to go to university in Canada or the UK, there simply wouldn't be enough seats. So let's not forget that, despite the doom and gloom and the somewhat lackluster response to COVID-19 in the US, we still have a lot going for us. And there's still, I think, a great amount of interest in studying in the US and students who haven't decided firmly to go with another study destination. So we need to generate and maintain sort of a steady pipeline of inquiries and making impressions on students early in their college search process. The fastest way to decline even faster than we've seen in the last 6 months is to not try and completely exit the space. Digital recruitment obviously is important. It was important before COVID-19. It's become even more important because you can't travel to China unless you hold a Chinese passport and are willing to go through 14 days of hotel quarantine in a government-owned hotel, which doesn't exactly sound fun. So, however, I think that it also bears mentioning that digital recruitment will probably continue to be more important than it was before COVID-19 because more students and more families are getting comfortable using VR tours instead of visiting campuses. They're comfortable using social media and internet resources to get information that they couldn't get in person. College fairs are still really complicated to host and impractical to get universities to visit. So people are more and more comfortable. We've sort of broken through this barrier for a lot of online skeptic people about research in the college process, which means that in order to succeed in a post-COVID world, it's important that you have really strong digital game in China. Obviously, while you're doing digital marketing amid the pandemic, tone and message are really important. It's important that we be sensitive to the deeply uncertain fate that students are looking at next year if they're rising seniors. It's important to stand out. Nearly every day, we see announcements from universities about Zoom webinars. Some of them are done well, some less so. Some are just pure advertisements and information about a specific school. Some talk about sort of trends and themes in admissions. Some work with agents, some do not. I think that throughout this process, though, of kind of rethinking the way that you recruit digitally, this is kind of, COVID presents an opportunity not just to reset, but also to rethink the way that you do recruitment through online platforms. If you kind of have a WeChat account, but it's sort of an afterthought, if you have a Chinese language website, but it's not hosted locally, this is actually an opportunity, I think, to rethink in a systematic way, the way that you're reaching people through digital tools in China. So let's talk about the three big social platforms first. So everyone's probably heard of WeChat. Weibo has been around for a long time. There's some exciting new developments there. And Douyin, which is the Chinese cousin of TikTok. So WeChat is by far the most widely used social network in China. Generally, you share medium form text articles with some pictures and videos baked in there. And WeChat is mostly used to engage people who you already know. It's fundamentally a closed network, which means that you're only going to see content from accounts and from people who you already follow or you already are friends with. So it's more so for engaging people who are already in your network. Universities, as foreign nonprofit registered organizations, cannot do advertisements inside of the WeChat platform. So the only way that you really get love on WeChat is to earn it, right? Either by having stakeholders like students, alumni, agents, partners, counselors share your material, or by paying them to do so. But you can't pay Tencent like you can Facebook to put your content out there to more people. On the other hand, Weibo, it's more like Chinese Twitter meets Instagram. There's a lot of images, but fundamentally you can put out, there's a lot of space for short form text posts. And you can use it to expand your network and you can do advertisements through it. Similarly, Douyin is also a more open platform, but it focuses on short form videos similar to TikTok. So let's have a look at what's going on with these three big platforms, what happened in the last year that's worth knowing. So like I said, WeChat is the most popular. It's not growing that much because basically everyone in China already has a WeChat account. Most people spend more than an hour a day on the app. There are 20 million official accounts out there. 80% of people say that they use official accounts to get information. And WeChat is actually, one interesting development in the past year is it's actually kind of swallowed the functions that people associate with apps like Slack, workplace communication. So the new things that happened this past year on WeChat that we're watching is, so like I said, WeChat's a closed platform. You only really see content that you follow, information from people who you're friends with. There is this super like button called Wow, where if you wow something, then your friends can see what you wowed. They can't see what you liked, but they can see what you wowed. So this is, I think, WeChat moving somewhat more in the direction of being a little bit more of an open platform, although it's still fundamentally a closed one. Every single one of these social media platforms is trying to copy Instagram stories and Snapchat stories. WeChat's attempt at this is called the time capsule. An interesting, cool feature we like is there's now a heat map feature, which allows people to, as a publisher, you can see how far into an article a user gets before they navigate away. So you can see how interesting an article really was to a user. WeChat mini programs went from 2017 to being kind of this experimental gimmick to being something that's very mainstream now. So now WeChat is being called a super app because there are all these little applets called mini programs inside of WeChat to do anything from buy a t-shirt to buy movie tickets to make a doctor's appointment. Really almost any function you can think of, there's an applet for that inside of WeChat. Some cool things that happened in 2020. Video accounts are now allowing people to post short form videos, tapping into this trend of video-based content. Live stream has become very popular among e-commerce brands and increasingly among other publishers. So live streaming different information sessions or different AMA sort of sessions. You can do those through the app itself, through Tencent Live or through external mini programs. WeChat Work has gotten a lot better. And a lot of people are kind of treating WeChat Work, which is a separate version of WeChat, kind of similar to how we use Slack in the States. And of course, WeChat has always had excellent emoji game, and that has only increased. So now there's some really fun new emojis out there. My personal favorite is the Doge emoji, the silly dog. On a more serious note though, most people when they get started with WeChat have a personal account. If you don't have a personal account on WeChat, you absolutely should have one. When you register one, you'll have to tie it to a phone number. So if you have a work cell phone number, I suggest you tie it to that so that it's not tied to your individual cell phone number. When you create or when you're using your personal WeChat account, there's probably a couple of pointers that we recommend or emphasize. The first is if you meet someone from China or who works in or around China, add them on WeChat. It's more useful than trading a business card. Trade a business card if you email a lot, but recognize that you're going to have the easiest time staying in touch with them if you add them on WeChat. Follow up with a short message saying it was nice to meet you at blah, wherever you met them. Download the desktop app. It's a really awesome way to share files with counselors and with agents. The attachments that you send over WeChat desktop do expire after 4 days. So if someone sends you an attachment, make sure to download it on your computer in hard copy. But it's a really fast and seamless way to send people files. It's a lot better than Dropbox or Google Drive. You should post stuff on your personal WeChat account, and that shouldn't just be advertisements for your institution. It's really useful to post things that are in your life. Treat it like your Facebook wall. Or perhaps a censored version of your Facebook wall. So occasionally post videos or pictures on your moments. Try to get involved and get pulled into WeChat groups. There's fantastically useful groups of counselors nationally in specific cities, agent groups. These are all, these are all communities that you should try to get involved in and occasionally publish inside of. When you add someone as a contact, you would want to label them appropriately. Most people's WeChat screen names aren't their actual names. It'll be something silly a lot of the time. It'll just be a character you don't recognize. It might just be a bacon emoji or something silly. So you want to make sure to tag who this person is, where you met them, maybe 1 or 2 details that will jog your memory of who this person is. You can upload videos into your moments. People tend to watch videos a little bit more now than they used to on WeChat. And you can also, when you post photos, you can do these collages, which are really cool. So here's what it looks like. So when you post photos on WeChat, this is actually an example of a collage where these are actually 9 separate photos that are stitched together. There are these little applets you can use to create those collages. People tend to look at those a little bit more closely. And lastly, when you're in a WeChat group, you can notify everyone that you have something important to say by just using the @all, and that will ping everyone with a notification that they were tagged. Some suggestions for things not to do on your personal WeChat account is don't wait too long to reply to a message. The expectation really is that you respond pretty quickly. There's a faster expected response time than for email. Don't write super long messages. Try to keep it under 75 words. It should fit in a cell phone screen because that's what most people are using to read your message. And don't just post ads in your moments. Try to post something that really shows who you are and some of your hobbies. It makes people a little bit relatable, finds it, it's a little bit easier for people to kind of feel a sense of guanxi or connection to you when they look at your account. Similarly, don't only post ads in groups, and make sure that if you're posting Chinese language content, that's great, but proof or have someone who speaks Chinese natively edit, make sure that that translation is accurate. Here's an example of how you can set remarks and tags for your contacts as well. Now, most people have individual accounts, but you also want to consider having an official university presence on WeChat. So there's 3 kinds of official accounts. I'll focus on the one that's probably the most relevant, which is subscription accounts. So subscription accounts focus on information and promotion, right? So this is most useful in the context of an admissions office where you're trying to get information out to the general public about your school, important stories that are happening on campus, and the school's voice on important news and current events. You can post as often as you want, really. You can post once a day, although we don't really recommend that often, but you can post quite often, up to once a day. The subscription accounts, when you put out a post on a subscription account, the message you send out actually goes to each user's subscription accounts folder. There's a nice folder that's like news updates, basically, that users can go into and browse and see what major updates are available from the publishers that they follow whenever they want. There are some other kinds of accounts out there on WeChat. There are service accounts, which are more useful for e-commerce brands or in customer service settings, where you want to send people updates about when their stuff will arrive at their house or something like that. Service accounts can be quite intrusive. So we have seen some universities create these WeChat service accounts where every time you post an article on a service account, it actually pushes a personal notification to that person's cell phone. Now that sounds great. Wow, like I'm getting a notification. I'm not just getting sent to this like updates folder, but that begins to feel quite intrusive. Imagine if you sent people newsletters once a week. That would be probably a little heavy-handed, right? Especially if a student is following 10, 12, 20 WeChat accounts, that means that they're getting 20 updates per week. That's just too many. And eventually after 1 or 2 or 3 posts, they're just gonna unfollow you. That's what has been our observation. So we strongly recommend subscription accounts. We think that balances the interest of being respectful of people's privacy and not over-subscribing them while still getting out important information when you want to. There are also these applets that I alluded to before. Those tend to be more useful for e-commerce or for more commercial uses. Now, Weibo has been around in China since 2007. It's a pretty old platform. It peaked and then it declined a bit as WeChat became really popular, and it kind of reemerged in 2017. It reemerged by copying Instagram stories and by subsuming a lot of the functions that that app had. So it's very much focused on pictures and short content, 140 characters, although you can pack a lot more punch into 140 Chinese characters simply because of the density of the language. One thing that we're seeing on Weibo especially is that you can now integrate 360-degree view media. So you can put in snippets of your VR tour or other sort of snapshots of life on campus that you've taken with a 360 camera. You can post those on Weibo. We think that Weibo is probably the easiest place to get started if you don't have an active social media presence in China, and especially if you're a smaller school or a school without a very large Chinese student enrollment. You can buy yourself followers on Weibo and do in-platform ads, something which you can't do on WeChat. So it's a little easier to get started and to make a fairly modest marketing budget go far. So speaking of advertising tools, if you want to advertise on Weibo, so you create your official account, you get it verified by Sina, you get this blue V next to your account that says this is the official account of whatever institution, and then you can start to run ads. Similar to Facebook, you can run impression ads for posts to try to get likes for a particular post, or you can do follower campaigns where you try to get people to follow your account so that they'll see future posts that you release. We really like the follower approach. So doing campaigns to get people to follow your account. That's more useful in the long term because it's going to last long. People will start to see your content even after the end of that campaign. Here's what the back-end advertising tool looks like. It's really nice. You can target people by where they are, who they are, gender, age. There's lots of interesting proxies that Sunrise has developed for propensity to study abroad. You can also target people by their interest in international education, study overseas, different things like that. So we really like the demographic targeting tools in Weibo. We think that compared to any of the other Chinese social media platforms, it's probably the most sophisticated. So here's what these ads actually look like to a user. One other advertising tool we really like in Weibo is being able to do Weibo raffles. So you can actually give away prizes and directly in-app. So you just announce whatever the giveaway is. It's usually a gift card of some kind, and Weibo can actually run the raffle for you, and you'll get some extra followers and a little bit of extra attention that way. Weibo stories, like I said, kind of propelled the app to being popular. So it's, this is kind of From a content perspective, we really like using moments and using posts on campus that are visually striking, that capture people's attention, that stop that infinite scroll that people do. And posting 360-degree view media, people think that's a little bit more fun, it's more interactive. The third platform we have our eye on is Douyin. Now, this logo up in the corner, you probably recognize because it looks like the TikTok logo, because it is. But they're different apps. So TikTok is the international version of Douyin. Douyin is a Chinese app. There's a separate backend. They look the same on the outside, but the content, the users, and the backend software is different. So between TikTok and Douyin, because they're owned by the same company, put together, they were the most downloaded application in the world in 2019. Douyin on its own has 518 million monthly active users, grew by 30% last year. It's leveling off now, but still growing at about 10% a year. Daily active users increased by 62% last year, and people are spending about 45 minutes on the app a day. So that tells you that this is kind of the app that's the new kid on the block. It's becoming very popular, so it's worth knowing about. 22% of all digital advertising targeting the Chinese audience was spent either on Douyin or other platforms owned by ByteDance, which is the company that owns them. Douyin used to be playful and a bit silly, similar to TikTok, teenagers dancing to funny music videos, stuff like that. Not so much anymore. Actually, what brought about this change was COVID-19. You started to see governments putting out propaganda or inspirational videos about frontline workers in Wuhan, the struggles that they face on Douyin. And on the other side, you saw citizen journalists beginning to report live updates about the coronavirus in February from different cities around China on Douyin. Since then, Douyin has become a much more sort of higher ed friendly platform. Before we were, in 2019, we talked about Douyin and we're kind of wondering, is this inevitably going to get serious enough that a university could post on this with an advertisement about a student's future? I think now we're at that point. At this point, there's a couple of things that have changed. So now in Douyin, videos are searchable, which means that if I'm searching for information about universities, I might be able to see content posted by a university. Also, some universities and high schools in China are even teaching class through Douyin in 60-second increments, which is kind of funny to think about. It's actually really nice for experiential education. So we've seen cool articles about music teachers and PE teachers teaching kids exercises or teaching kids music instruments through Douyin. It's still really popular among young users. So the average user on Douyin is under 25. So it's mostly students, less so parents on this. And one other thing that we like about Douyin is that the cost per click and the cost per impression, if you're doing a campaign on Douyin, are very inexpensive, much lower than Weibo and orders of magnitude cheaper than WeChat. So this is a lot of information. How do you succeed on these platforms? This is the fundamental question. On WeChat, we think that it is important to effectively use your personal account. That's the low-hanging fruit. You don't need to pay money for a personal account. If you have an official account, use your subscription account to effectively represent your university's voice in China. Share medium form content that's fresh and that speaks to current events, concerns that parents have as much as possible. Remember that you're speaking to parents and students. WeChat has basically the entire demographic spread represented in their users. And make sure that you're speaking to current stakeholders in China. Refract your story through the lens of the Chinese community. Ultimately, you should be thinking about, you shouldn't just be copy pasting your material from Facebook, but think about how does this look in China? How are we talking about the Chinese student experience on WeChat? Because you want people to share your content because that's the only way it's going to, get a broader viewership on WeChat. On Weibo, you'll probably share some videos. You certainly will on Douyin. Remember that most users on social media do not have audio on when they play videos. So you want to make sure that if you're talking, that there are subtitles in Chinese. And if you're writing text posts, make sure that you're using hashtags that are relevant to trending topics. Post visually striking photos that actually stop people from scrolling. And try to voice an opinion and an identity rather than just plain vanilla reporting the facts. And certainly, especially if you're just getting started, you'll want to do some targeted and carefully crafted campaigns and advertisements that target particular potential students. On Douyin, much the same, but the focus is more on short form videos. Try to mix formal videos that might come from your marketing and communications department with more true to life, less formal videos from students, from student ambassadors, from Chinese community members. Try to show the voice of and diversity of the people and the roles that exist in your office and in your community. Now, let's talk about the bans. So the Trump administration released later in the summer these executive orders talking about how U.S. entities are not allowed to transact or do transactions regarding WeChat and TikTok. So this was in large part in response to some perceived national security risks of US user information getting shared and getting leaked to the Chinese government because TikTok is popular among young people in China, or is popular among young people in the US. What these executive orders are not, these are not bans on the use of either app. They're not bans on paying agencies to post on your account. And they're not bans on advertisements inside of China or on the Chinese apps. If you read the executive order text, it actually specifically refers to WeChat and TikTok, not Douyin, which is a different piece of software hosted on different servers with different users. Most Americans don't use Douyin, it's in Chinese. Similar, WeChat, we talk about like it's one thing, but there's actually two versions of the app. There's WeChat, which is the international one. You probably have it on your phone. And then there's Weixin, which is what you end up downloading if you're on the Chinese app store, which is pretty much every Chinese user. So if you're marketing in China to China, these executive orders do not affect you at the very least, as far as as we can make out from the text of the orders. It's also important to note that these executive orders were very hastily drafted, doesn't specify which app is being targeted, and federal courts have already halted the implementation of these executive orders. So even if you do end up with a Trump administration in January of 2021, there's going to be a lengthy court battle, and the courts have already ruled that these executive orders may not be enforced. So we don't see much cause for concern for universities regarding policy moves regarding these platforms. Now, speaking of policy, let's go on the other side and talk about the Great Firewall, websites, and search engines in China. So the fundamental message is probably the same as in 2019, which is to localize your website. That means having Chinese language content. That's important because some parents don't read English. That's also important because if you want to climb the ranks of a Chinese language search engine, you're going to need Chinese language material and content. However, having a Chinese language website isn't enough. You do need to host it inside of China. So what we mean by this is hosting it on a .cn domain. This allows you to do search engine marketing and allows you to do search engine optimization. If you're not hosted inside of China, then you are at a disadvantage as compared to a locally hosted website. So some examples of universities that have not localized their web presence. So if you look at Cornell University, if you search it on Baidu, #1 result is an agent. And if you search on 360, #1 result is Airbnb listings for housing near Cornell. If you search for University of Southern California, you end up with 4 agencies before you end up with the actual university's website. On the other hand, if you look at a different university like the University of Oregon, which has localized their Chinese web presence, you can see that basically there's Chinese Wikipedia at the top of the organic search results, followed by the university's US and Chinese website. So it helps to kind of fight back against misinformation and deliberate attempts at redirecting traffic from your university's website to an agent's website. But it's also useful because if you localize your website, then you'll be able to get an ICP license. An ICP license is what is required to take out ads on Douyin, as well as on pretty much every every search engine platform, right? So if you want to actually do pay-per-click ads in China, you will need this thing called an ICP license. An ICP license is basically a license from the Chinese government that's saying that you are allowed to host this website in China. You will need a you'll need a Chinese business license. If you have an in-country office, then you probably have this. If you don't have an in-country office in China, then you would need to work with a local partner. Sunrise is one among many companies that would be happy to serve as your partner. But when we create an ICP for you, then this allows you to do advertisements on Baidu, 360, Douyin, and the many other search platforms that are out there that will allow you to get more traffic towards your website so that people end up filling out inquiry forms. So let's take a closer look at where you can actually do search engine marketing and optimization. So Baidu is the most popular search engine in China still, but they're losing a lot of ground to 360, Shenma, Sogou, and a couple of others. So Baidu and Sogou are the most popular. Baidu is most popular with desktop and for casual basic questions. Sogou is the baked-in search engine provider inside of WeChat. And a lot of people actually have begun to talk about how the division between search, like Google, and social, like Facebook, is beginning to blur in China. So most people, when they're looking for information in China, it's actually not a safe bet that they're going to go into an internet browser, open up Baidu and pop it in. They're just as likely to search for news articles or official accounts on WeChat or on Toutiao or on these other platforms. So the division between search and social is beginning to blur in China. And this is something that we've really seen in the last year or two, particularly as WeChat is considering acquiring a major search engine called Sogou. So we really like advertising on Sogou because basically it gives you a back door to be able to advertise inside of WeChat in some instances. The other major sort of social-ish tool that we like to talk about is Toutiao, which is similar to Apple News. The reason why it's so much more important than Apple News in China is that most mainstream news providers in China have editorial constraints from the Chinese government. There's a particular message from the government that is being pushed by the People's Daily, the China Daily, the Global Times. On the other hand, Toutiao actually has a personalized news feed that is not responsive to what the party wants you to see, but is instead responsive to what you like and what you read. We think that Toutiao is a particularly helpful platform for advertising for graduate programs because most of the users are between 18 and 35. Most of the users spend the average session time is 75 minutes on this platform. So that means that tells us that people are reading news. They're reading pretty serious things. They're in a more serious mindset than on Weibo, where they might be looking at silly cat pictures or something. And a placement from a university about where your future is in the US or the UK or something, that seems to be much better placed alongside serious news content and news about the world and about the future. One other platform that's kind of bleeding, or merging the differences or on the fence between search and social is Bilibili. Bilibili has been around for a really long time. It was pretty well known, or used to be known, as the place where you would go to watch pirated video content in China. But it's becoming much more mainstream and respected as a sort of YouTube with a dash of Netflix mixed in. During the pandemic, they saw a 70% user growth because a lot of people were at home and were catching up on TV. But since then, it's actually become a lot more serious, similar to Douyin. More universities are posting sample classes of some of their most famous professors on there. You can do advertisements inside of Bilibili, leveraging a lot of that video content you might have made for Douyin. So you can post demo content, demo class content, other things like that. And crucially, you're not limited to 15 seconds. So you can post much longer videos on Bilibili. So we like that as well, and we think that it's worth watching. So here's an example of what Toutiao looks like. Another one that's a little bit on the margins of search, but is worth knowing, is Zhihu. Zhihu is like Quora in China. It's questions and answers. It's a knowledge platform. A lot of students will ask, particularly if they have not heard of your university, hey, has anyone gone to the school? What's your experience there? So two uses for Zhihu. The first is just an advertising platform. Like any other search platform, you can place paid advertisements in it, and you can, you only pay for the clicks you get. The second is to actively participate in the conversation about your university. So if someone asks about the experience of going to your school, you can actually respond as the university, and you can also kind of fight back against negative comments that may have shown up there for some reason. So there's pretty active discussions of a lot of schools on Zhihu. I think it's really useful to participate, not just as an advertiser, but also as a discussant on here if you speak Chinese. Now, let's talk about Zoom and the way that we do information sessions to kids these days. So we'd like to talk about things you can do besides Zoom, or things that you can do in addition to Zoom. Two reasons for this. The first is that personally, all of us have lived our lives for the last 8 or 9 months now on Zoom. But beyond sort of the personal, it's important to remember that nearly every university, a lot of universities are doing info sessions on Zoom. It's hard to stand out. And let's also not forget that in 2019, for about a month, Zoom was actually censored in China. It was blocked. You had to, there were like a lot of online education providers in China actually had to migrate to Zoomoo or to a local platform. And to this day, so currently Zoom is not blocked, but it is not reliable, particularly if you really need reliable video footage or video feedback, that you do have persistent connection issues because of the Great Firewall. So it's viewed as less reliable than more locally hosted platforms. So it's not censored, but the other thing that's important to know is that people can't create paid accounts. They can't create pro accounts, and they can't host large meetings in China. So they can join your meetings, but in terms of what people are using to actually connect over video conferencing these days in China, they're not using Zoom because so many of the functions that make Zoom useful are blocked in China. And there's always that looming threat that it'll get censored again. And there's no real way to predict if that'll happen again. This has caused a lot of people to migrate to Zoomoo, which is essentially a carbon copy of Zoom, right down to the color scheme. It's a copy of Zoom. There's also Douyin, which you can use to live broadcast content like an information session. Sunrise, when we do our university student recruitment webinars, we use Weikaijiang, which is an applet inside of WeChat. So Weikaijiang is really nice because you don't have to register. You can just log in with your WeChat account and you're in. So you tend to have a little bit better turnout, and especially for sessions that are taking place after school or that are targeting potential graduate students, people who actually have their phones during the day, Weikaijiang tends to be really good. If you're mostly targeting high school students, you might have a better time with Zoomoo. So here's an example of some of the info sessions we've hosted with different partner universities on Weikaijiang. Here's what it looks like on a computer on the left and on mobile on the right. The other major trend that we'd like to bring attention to, and we've probably talked to you about VR a little bit in the past, but we think that it's an especially important time to think about VR because of COVID. Campus tours and having a good VR campus tour used to kind of be a bell and whistle. It was something that was sort of a courtesy to out-of-state kids and international students who couldn't visit campus. Now, even if your university is somehow hosting in-person tours, it's not likely that international students are going to be able to visit you because of visa and travel restrictions. Many people still aren't comfortable with going in person to universities, and many university campuses are closed. So VR campus tours have become centrally important to being able to show people what life on campus will be like and what their future would hold if they choose to spend the next 4 years with you. So a good VR campus tour is now essential because of COVID, and we think it's similar to how I was discussing before. It's an opportunity to do a reset of how you approach a really important piece of your digital presence. Now, one thing I'd like to comment on about accessibility of VR campus tours in China is that there's a couple, not many, but there's a couple of universities whose VR campus tours are hosted on Google-based servers and thus are completely blocked. So it's not certain that your VR tour is even accessible in China. Most universities, you can view the tour. However, it loads brutally slowly in China. So actually being able to move around and load videos or load 360 videos, load the content in the tour, crawls at such a slow pace that people tend to think it's broken or that there's some kind of tech problem. This is why when Sunrise creates VR campus tours, we actually create mirrors in China that are locally hosted. So that way Chinese users have a seamless experience and experience the same thing that any of your global users would experience. So a lot of people, when you hear VR tour, you think VR goggles. But it's important to remember that VR tours and the VR functionality of being able to move a device around and experience the act of looking around as you're inside the tour, that's doable with a phone, a tablet, a computer, or a cardboard headset. So this isn't something that is exclusively for VR headset owners. So why is VR more mainstream now than ever? The first is because of COVID, it's become necessary to do virtual tours. It's also much cheaper to film. The devices are much cheaper. Internet is between 3 and 10 times faster than it was in 2009. Now you can use phones, so you don't need to buy an expensive headset. The VR software platforms talk to each other better, so you don't have as many issues with cross-compatibility. So this has all led to a lot of really interesting use cases for VR if your university takes it seriously and buys in. The first is being able to host, being able to support yourself at fairs with VR campus tours. So usually when you're at a fair, you're talking to one or two students, and sometimes there's a line of kids who are waiting to talk to you. Instead of just saying, hey, wait, I'll be with you in a second, you can actually pass them a cardboard headset and have them play around and experience campus while you wrap up your first conversation. You can also send people immersive videos. There's good statistics out there that say that students are 85% more likely to watch a full video if it's in VR. You can send people customized you can send them customized emails on follow-up, showing them, if you know what major they're interested in or what course they're interested in studying, you can actually show them what the department building that they would study in looks like. You can actually show them, if you're interested in engineering, here's our lab or here's our makerspace. When the pandemic lifts, there's also the ability to do AR integrations where students can actually self-guide their own tours of campus and see all of those stories that your tour guides would ordinarily tell them projected onto their cell phone, which reflects what they're actually seeing. So it's much more of a seamless experience. So if you have holiday or weekend or evening visitors, you're still able to reach them somehow. But finally, and I think most interestingly, is hosting information sessions inside of the VR tour. So we were talking about, our theme here was beyond the Zoominar. So, okay, great, you can host a Zoominar, but on a local platform. What's the real alternative? Well, we'd say that a really persuasive and convincing alternative is not just doing an information session that goes from your server to your computer to Zoom's server to a user, but instead goes directly from your VR tour with you talking inside of it in real time to a user's computer. And this allows you to, this solves this problem of having the images being really grainy or being really slow. Instead, you're actually able to guide them just like you would be able to in person. So let's actually see what this looks like. So I'm going to keep the PowerPoint up here. Don't exit Zoom, but instead just pop open the chat, and you'll see that Gavin has just shared a link inside of the chat to a link to one of these tours. And we'll show you what this looks like. So just go ahead and click or copy paste the link that Gavin shared from chat into a browser window. So you can just press escape, pop open the chat, copy paste that URL into a browser. You don't need to give us your name and email. You can just fill in a filler there, click join, and you'll be able to hear Gavin. So don't quit Zoom, stay with us, but exit full screen, and Gavin will show you from a browser what this VR tour looks like.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, David. And for those of us now, I believe some of you, it looks like, have already joined into the VR session. So it's super cool. If you haven't figured out how to do that yet, go ahead and click the link in the chat. What you're seeing here in front of us is a 360 image. We're actually inside one of our partner tours at NJIT. I'm actually the tour guide, so you're able to see me actually inside of that tour and able to do, for example, in this case, it'd be an info session. You'll see these things, this pop-up. I actually have my laser pointer activated, but you'll see this pop-up right on top of the Makerspace door. And on top of that, you're actually able to click on the audio if you want to actually hear that read to you or learn about specific things that in a given location, which is kind of interesting. Additional things that are kind of fun is I actually, as the tour guide, can take us to different locations. So I'm going to go ahead and take us to a preset automated tour inside of the NJIT Makerspace. So go ahead and see what it looks like. We can actually look left and right and actually see an automated video of the Makerspace, which, for example, could be sent to a given prospective applicant if that is like a location of interest or something along those lines. We can also, I'm going to take us outside, so get us a little bit away from the music, take us to different locations. But you can envision a time, so let's say we actually were ordinarily scheduling an on-campus visit or an on-campus session. This way you can actually do those visits, a campus visit, except you're doing a campus visit for your international students. So you'd say like, oh, we're actually doing a virtual campus visit at 9 p.m. on whatever Tuesday. And then your international students can actually come with you as you walk around from location to location. And you actually have a student ambassador where is able to like answer those questions and take people to different regions, with the student ambassador completely controlling the tour experience, explaining all of the different locations and places that you want to go, and giving them a truly sort of a unique feel of what that campus life looks like, complete with videos, complete with pop-ups, and of course, complete with this full immersive 360 experience. Also, you'll notice that there is actually a chat in this as well, and we're actually currently working on share screen. So I can actually go ahead and say like, hello everyone, inside the chat. And then if, for instance, we were hosting an info session inside a reality tour, you could conduct all of the same things that we're doing in Zoom, except actually on campus, which can be kind of exciting. Just an interesting way to sort of approach these types of things. Though, of course, in addition to going arrow to arrow or location to location, sort of consequentially, we can actually teleport to different locations. So just for fun, I'm just going to teleport us, I don't know, I'll port us to where I am. So I'm going to actually teleport us to New York. So now I took us to New York. This is inside, outside the New York Public Library. To a university per se, but kind of a fun location all the same. It gives you an idea of sort of how these things, how these different types of locations can work and things like that. So it gives you, so that's one example. I could continue, for example, walking us inside. I can take us to different places, different locations, whatever makes the most sense. So this could be teleporting to different parts of campus, to town around campus, whatever it is that you really want to feature during your campus tour. So anyway, just a cool little glimpse into how this technology is constantly evolving. This is an interaction of live stream technology with 360 video. There's even cooler applications of this as well when it comes to AR, augmented reality applications. For example, being able to have these same pop-up bubbles that exist here inside of a given campus tour actually existing on the physical campus. So imagine, for example, being outside the makerspace, holding up your cell phone and still being able to see all these types of pop-up bubbles actually there physically in person. So it's an interesting sort of way of adding to that in-person campus experience. But anyway, just wanted to give you a fun little glimpse of it. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over back to David and exit this tour. But hopefully this gives you an idea of sort of how this immersive VR technology can become even more exciting.
Well, thank you, Gavin, and I hope that was a nice and much needed reprieve from hearing me talk. Let's move on then to some recommendations. But first, just for fun, here's some memes that we saw in China over the last year that we thought were kind of funny. My personal favorite was the Milk Tea Alliance. Basically, there was an internet spat between Chinese users and users in Thailand, and there was sort of this question of who milk tea belongs to, which country it was kind of, or which region, which was interesting. Of course, Wuhan Jiayou, or sort of encouraging messages about Wuhan through the pandemic were really popular. There's also an app that Chinese Communist Party members have to download that gives them Marxism quizzes periodically or every week. So some funny things just for fun as well. Now, in terms of some next steps, we definitely suggest that we're trying to build a little bit more robust sort of and meaningful discussion group on LinkedIn, focusing on Chinese education and international engagement. So feel free to join our LinkedIn group. We promise we won't post spam in it. It's really just for us to share some interesting articles in the news that we think are relevant or important. And of course, we welcome other people to share on it. Feel free to get in touch if you have questions about this. Obviously, we'll have a Q&A session, but if you've got some institution-specific questions, we'd welcome the opportunity to walk through those with you. We have webcasts that are being hosted on local platforms in China, which you might find useful in driving a little bit more interest in getting in front of more people than those who attend your traditional Zoom information sessions. You probably are in here because you downloaded our white paper. We like it. Maybe you should read it if you have time. So take a look at the white paper. We also produced an updated 2020 version of our do-it-yourself virtual reality tour guide, where we actually teach you how to create a VR tour on a pretty tight budget or with no budget. So that's possibly of interest. And then finally, if you have updates to share with Chinese counselors, we maintain a website called Best Fit Uni, which is the brand that a lot of high schools and counselors know us by when we run recruitment tours of China. So we have some Chinese counselors and families who check in on that regularly. So feel free to fill that in if you've got any major updates about your admissions policies, if you've gone test optional, or if you've got important sort of information regarding how you do admissions. Those links, so we will share a PDF version of this presentation, so you will be able to actually access these links. I realize there's a cruel irony in telling you to click links on a static image, so no worries. You will be able to access the PDF with all of these links on follow-up.
And
So,
I have actually posted them in the chat.
oh, terrific. Thank you, Gavin. We have about 10 minutes left for some Q&A. Let's take it away. So feel free to use the Q&A tool or the chat tool. We see some great questions that have come in. Peter Piotr asks, regarding WeChat, will WeChat be removed from the US App Store? If WeChat does get removed, what other options do we have? A couple of things here. The first is that if WeChat gets removed from the US App Store, that's not super important for Chinese users because most Chinese people are on the Chinese App Store because their payment setup, right? Like their billing address is in China. They're paying for apps and in-app purchases most of the time from China, usually with their parents' credit card. So that means that they're going to be on the Chinese App Store, not the US App Store. So I don't see much issue there. Like I said, WeChat has 1.2 billion users in China. If you don't have WeChat already and you're just downloading that as an admitted student or something, that's I'd say that's pretty unusual. Federal courts have halted the implementation of this executive order. I think that there is a very real and legitimate constitutional challenge on First Amendment grounds. It is a form of censorship. To block this app. The national security concerns raised by the administration don't seem to support a wholesale ban of it. I expect, at least based on what we're reading from informed legal scholars, that this is going to be a very protracted court battle, and that the initial sort of PR blitz that the Trump administration got from threatening to ban the app was essentially the objective, not so much following through. We've seen a lot of that happen with US executive orders in the past where they go through the courts for a really long time. The Department of Commerce, I believe, is the one responsible for developing rules and specific codifying what's not allowed. There's been no announcements whatsoever of what exactly is to be done in response to these executive orders. So essentially, we're not seeing very much follow through from the administration. It's held up in the courts, and it probably will be for a very long time. And the target of the ban is stateside, not China side. So if you're marketing in China and to people who are on the Chinese App Store, then we don't really see much of an issue there. Your other options, if magically, I don't know, the Trump administration got really good at implementing things and was elected this year, and all of the worst case scenario, is Weibo and Douyin are still certainly viable options. You will still be able to maintain an official account. It's just that users who are in the US App Store won't be able to update the app. But I mean, let's not forget that Chinese users have lived in China. And internet circumvention is definitely a thing you get good at in China. Most of the time it's people want to watch TV from, they want to watch Big Bang Theory or something. So they figure out ways to get around internet blocks in China. These are a pretty savvy group of kids, especially if they're already in the States. They probably could figure out a savvy way to get around it. And I'm sure that it will be a matter of days, maybe a week, before some workaround is developed by users to get around a possible problem in the absolute worst case. But I really don't take very seriously the possibility that the worst case I described is actually going to happen.
Excellent. So we have a couple other questions. First, regarding ICP certificates, the cost of getting it through us. Well, there's two sort of pieces to this question. The first is the website ultimately hosted in China? So getting the ICP license isn't sufficient if it is still an internationally hosted site. So the first question would be like, is there actually a Chinese website in place that can go through the censor? So it'd have to be generally Chinese content or bilingual content. English content can be approved, but it's very challenging. And is it hosted in China, either on an Alibaba server or on one of our servers? It doesn't actually make a difference. Then we can actually apply for the ICP license. If the site is already hosted in China and we're doing the application process only, it generally would be something like $1,000. However, if we're actually building a landing page on behalf of a university entirely in Chinese, translation, design, hosting, etc., it is actually included with all of our website services, which generally would be for a brand new website, something like $5,500. Next question, it looks like, is about Vimeo. Vimeo, in fact, is also frequently blocked as well. So we have tried doing Vimeo live streaming. That's never worked. And Vimeo content is, there's actually been some instances where we've been able to load it, but it's intensely slow. That makes it basically not usable. the services that we tend to recommend for video hosting tend to be Tencent Video, because it integrates very closely with WeChat. It's actually the only service that you can use if you plan on using video in WeChat, which is quite important. So if you have a WeChat account, then Tencent Video is probably the way to go. And then you just get a paid corporate account. You're probably going to be paying something like $800 to $1,000 a month. Sorry, $1,000 a year. So not gonna break the bank there. Though you do need a local entity in order to get that subscription, similar to having exactly like every other local account in China. Or you can look at Youku. Youku actually is less expensive, but you can't share those videos inside of WeChat. You could, however, share them on Weibo or link them to a website. So different options, depends on ultimately what you plan on using them for.
Those are generally more useful if you're, I mean, Youku is like YouTube. It is also kind of a social network, and people will discover things on these. I'm sure that there are other, hosting platforms in China that aren't blocked, but the question is just, do you want to be discovered, or do you just literally want a link to post? So if you just want a link to post that's going to be embedded in the website or something, then there's probably lower cost options as well that we're happy to provide you some suggestions on follow-up. Our top recommendations, though, would probably be Youku and Tencent Video.
Cool. Any additional questions? Feel free to pop them in the chat or in the Q&A section. Give it a last 10 seconds.
Well, I suppose in the meantime, as we kind of churn for any final closing thoughts, we'd like to thank everyone for being such an engaged audience. We know this was fast, so we will be sharing the PDF of the presentation as well as a recording. Look out for that over email. You can feel free to send it to whomever you'd like. Feel free to circulate it on campus or to colleagues. If any questions come up on follow-up, certainly feel free to just respond to the same person who sent you the email, which would most likely be our colleague Keating, who had sent you the initial invite in the first place. With that said, I guess in closing, I'd say that the Chinese internet, like nearly everything, has changed a lot in the last year. We think the fundamentals, though, are much the same, which is that it's important to see how these platforms are adjusting and adapting. A strategy that worked in 2008 isn't going to work in 2020. This is a real opportunity to do a reset, a real opportunity to rethink how you show up on the Chinese internet. Sunrise would welcome the possibility of discussing how that might work in your particular institutional context. And in closing, I guess I'd say, be safe and be well. We know it's a difficult and uncertain time. We hope that, by collaborating and sticking together, we can come out of this stronger, better, and smarter.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one.